Hello, everyone, and welcome to another installment of the Aurora Dialogues Online series. My name is Armina Fan. I am the Executive Director of the Aurora Humanitarian Initiative, and I'm tasked at the beginning of these, as you'll know if you've joined before, with a brief hello on behalf of the organization and an introduction before we get into the meat of the discussion. So expect this to be brief. We're all here today on Nelson Mandela Day to hear about and from people who have dedicated their lives in service of others and to humanity. Very, very befitting of a day in honor of Nelson Mandela. We have these days in the calendar, I'd like to think, to remind us of our shared values, our shared humanity, and of the best of us. For those who have gathered today, this is a fitting tribute. And I would encourage everyone to think about or hear, listen for the behaviors, the decisions, the small everyday tasks that we can all take onto ourselves to better reflect those values, better reflect Nelson Mandela's legacy. Today, we're partnering with the New Humanitarian, whose CEO, Hiba Ali, will moderate our formidable panel. I did want to note, Hiba, I took a look at your TED Talk from 2017, and something really stood out today, echoing down the line years later to me, which was the message that an engaged citizenry needs to actually look toward the news, listen to better news, but look toward the news because of our common humanity. If the UN is going out and targeting more than the population of France in 2017, and I just checked, more than the population of Nigeria in 2023, shouldn't we know where that's going? Shouldn't we be participants in that, whether in our local community or internationally? And I think the New Humanitarian does a fantastic job of bringing that quality independent journalism to enable the citizenry. And hopefully the combination of that, plus listening to some of the folks we have on our panel today, can enable all of us to, again, bring some of these behaviors into our everyday life. So I'll hand over to you. Heba, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Armin. It's a pleasure to be here and on such a special day. For those who don't know the New Humanitarian, we're a nonprofit news organization. We report about humanitarian crises around the world, from conflict to displacement, climate change to health emergencies, and we try to put our journalism at the service of the world's most vulnerable people, both in looking at the challenges that they face, but also in the efforts that they and many others are making to improve their lives. So we're really happy to be partnering with Aurora in hosting this conversation. Now, while Nelson Mandela was in prison, many others were continuing the fight against apartheid in South Africa. And among them was an Anglican priest from New Zealand who arrived in South Africa in the midst of apartheid to realize that as a white man, he was a beneficiary of racism, but could also decide to work against it. So he joined the liberation movement, became a chaplain to Nelson Mandela's African National Congress, and 3.5 years later, as a result of his activism, was expelled from South Africa. In 1990, while in exile, 3 months after Mandela's release from prison, Father Michael Lapsley received a letter bomb that would cost him his 2 hands and loss of sight in 1 eye. He went on to found the Institute for Healing of Memories to help people heal from war, from oppression, and from injustice. And Nelson Mandela described Father Michael's life as representing a compelling metaphor. Mandela said, "We read about a foreigner who came to our country and was transformed by what he saw of the injustices of apartheid. His life is part of the tapestry of many long journeys and struggles of our people." So to kick us off today on Nelson Mandela Day, I can think of no better person than Father Michael Lapsley, who's joining us today from Timor-Leste, although he's normally based in Cape Town. We will hear a few thoughts from him, and then we'll jump into a conversation with human rights activists from around the world, weave in some of your questions that we've already received as well. And if you've got questions live, you can share them on Facebook or YouTube. We'll be monitoring those channels. So without further ado, Father Michael, over to you for some opening remarks.
Thank you, Madam Ali, and it is a great privilege to be with you here on the UN Nelson Mandela Day. And I want to thank the Aurora Dialogues and the new Humanitarian, of which you, I think, are the CEO, for the privilege of being with you, and for my colleagues and all those who are joining us from around the world. And I suppose in a way I should begin by saying happy heavenly birthday to Nelson Mandela, because of course this is the day of his birth. And the United Nations declared Nelson Mandela Day and said that the whole world, in honor of him, should spend 67 minutes doing something for other people, just as he spent 67 years in his service to humanity in public life. I want to begin with perhaps my favorite quote from Nelson Mandela, was what he said the day before he was sentenced to what became 27 years in prison. And he said, and I quote, "I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal for which I hope to live for and to achieve, but if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die." 27 years later, he came out, as I was saying. So he is an embodiment of sacrifice and commitment to others, and particularly in the battle against racism and all forms of discrimination. But another quote of his that relates to my own journey, you referenced the fact that I received a letter bomb just 3 months after Nelson Mandela had been released from prison. And he said, and I quote again, "As I walked out the door towards the gate that would lead to my freedom, I knew that if I didn't leave my bitterness and hatred behind, I'd still be in prison." And that helped me because I realized that if I was filled with hatred and bitterness and desire for revenge, that I would be a victim forever. So for me, he was the supreme example. And another last quote for the moment, Mandela said after freedom came to South Africa in April of 27th, 1994, he said that we're not yet free. We have been freed to begin the journey of creating that just and equal society. And of course, he also said, as an internationalist, we know too well that our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinians. So he's as an example for the whole of humanity and for the ongoing struggles of today. But thank you for the opportunity of leading off.
Thank you so much, Father Michael, for grounding us in Nelson Mandela's vision and his approach to all of this. I just want to follow up with you on where you just ended about, we're not yet free. If you think about what Nelson Mandela was fighting for, racial justice, human rights for all, and then you look around the world today and we see blatant racism in the US. You mentioned Palestine and the treatment of Palestinians by Israel, but also treatment of minorities in places like Myanmar, the treatment of refugees in Europe, but also many other parts of the world, and so on and so forth. Where do you think we are in the struggle for human rights today? Are we much further ahead than in Nelson Mandela's time?
Well, in a way, we won some formal battles. So, for example, we had hundreds of racist laws in South Africa. They've all gone. We created a constitution which outlawed discrimination on the basis of race, gender, disability, and the first country in the world also sexual orientation. So it's one thing to win the formal battles. Just as, of course, you see in the United States, the formal battles were won, but there was still endemic racism. So to change the systems and to change attitudes is a much greater challenge. So there's lots to be depressed about, but also we need to celebrate the gains that have been made in relation to racism, in relation to disability, in relation to sexual orientation. There have been giant strides, but there's still much to be done. Mandela talked about looking out the vistas and pausing for a moment, but looking out to the mountaintops that still need to be scaled on the road to true freedom and equality and justice for all human beings. But Mandela inspires us by those 67 years to say it's not about struggling for a day, a week, a month, a year. It's about committing our lives and being willing to sacrifice for the freedom and, of course, most importantly, for the dignity of all human beings.
Well, we can see in very real terms the sacrifice you've made every time you lift your hand, and I can only begin to imagine what you have gone through. We have a question from a member of the audience, Sharon Uma, for you, Father Michael, and she says, how did your personal journey of healing from physical and emotional wounds influence your decision to establish the Institute for Healing of Memories?
So thank you, my sister, for that question. You know, for 16 years, I lived outside South Africa. I've been expelled. I lived in Lesotho, the small African country, and I lived in Zimbabwe. But I traveled the world in the cause of the struggle against apartheid, particularly mobilizing the faith community. So when I was bombed, there were messages of prayer, love, support from all over the world. And from a perspective of faith, that was the vehicle that God used to help me make my bombing redemptive, to bring life out of death, good out of evil. So I was accompanied on my journey of healing. When I returned to South Africa, I found that many people, in a way, all they had was their victimhood. They were not accompanied in the way that I was. And so that brought me a calling to create safe and sacred spaces where people could tell each other their story. And of course, if we've been oppressed and treated unjustly, we're totally justified to hate, to be bitter, to want revenge. But in the end, the key discovery is that that doesn't destroy our enemies, it destroys us. But eventually, of course, this South African process became a worldwide process. And so now we have a global network, because the reality is we are a wounded humanity and a wounded Mother Earth. And the question is, how do we respond to our woundedness? Where we are supported and encouraged and listened to, then we're much more likely to be able to, instead of transmitting our trauma from one generation to another, to transform it, to become agents working for transformative and restorative justice.
Father Michael, I have a lot of these conversations, and I'm difficult to inspire these days, but you do inspire me, I must say. And you have said in the past that we can each become Nelson Mandelas in our own way. And today we have several modern day Nelson Mandelas with us who are equally inspiring, I must say, and who are each fighting for their own struggles for human rights in their corners of the world. So let me introduce them to you briefly. From Cairo in Egypt, Mahinur al-Masri, a lawyer and political activist who was involved in the protests that led to the ousting of President Hosni Mubarak. But she has also been involved in all kinds of activism. The list is very long, from protecting the rights of detainees and prisoners to Syrian refugees in Egypt. Welcome, Mahinur.
Thank you so much. I feel very humbled to be among all those great people.
And from Hyderabad in India, Sunita Krishnan is an anti-trafficking activist who co-founded the organization Prajwala, which works to prevent human and sex trafficking and support those who are trafficked. Welcome, Sunita.
Thank you. Namaste to everybody who's watching this show. Thank you so much.
Namaste.
Very grateful to be here.
And last but not least, from Choco in Colombia, Marino Cordova is the president of the National Association of Displaced Afro-Colombians, who has fought for the rights of minorities in his country. Welcome, Marino.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so happy to be here with you.
I'm struck by something that you said, Sunita, in an interview I watched of you, and you said, if somebody joins the army to fight for their nation, they obviously take on the challenge of possibly getting killed. And when people make the choice to be a humanitarian or a human rights activist, there are things that come with that as well. And all of you have made deep personal sacrifices for the work that you do. We saw the example of Michael, but Sunita was gang raped. Mahinur was imprisoned several times and is currently banned from traveling. Marino had his son murdered and had to flee his own country for many years. So you have all paid a very heavy price to further human rights, and we're so lucky to have you here today. And thank you for everything that you've done. Mahinur, I wanted to start with you. You have spent collectively, if I'm not wrong, around 3.5 years in prison in various stints. And in 2014, you received a prize called the Ludovic Trarieux International Human Rights Prize, which is given annually to a lawyer for their contributions to human rights. And you're the only person after Nelson Mandela to receive this prize while in prison. So very apt to be speaking to you today in his remembrance. And you say it's a matter of choice, whether to be with the people and feel their pain or to be in line with the criminals who are stealing the people's bread. So I'd love to hear how that kind of mentality has shaped your approach to activism in Egypt over the years.
Okay, thank you for that. But only before I answer your question, I want to say that just moments ago, Patrick George, a fearless researcher who sheds light on the plight of Coptic Christians in Egypt, was unjustly sentenced to 3 years in prison under terrorism law with no possibility of appealing. This is just a glimpse of the daily horrors faced by thousands of Egyptians who languish in CC's prisons. Don't be fooled by the regime's propaganda of national dialogue with the opposition. We must stand with Patrick and demand justice for all those who have been silenced and oppressed by this brutal regime. So this is a glimpse of a day in Egypt, an ordinary day in Egypt. Going back to your question, it's all a matter of choice. So for me, though I've been surrounded by all the time negative news coming from different sources, I still hold a steadfast belief in remaining optimistic and finding value in every sacrifice that is made. It is unfortunate that the world is currently facing severe inequality, with the poorest 50% of the global population owning only 2% of the total net wealth, while the richest 10% own 76% of the wealth. The disparity between countries also insignificant, with countries in North America and Europe accounting for 57% of total household wealth, but comprising only 17% of the world's adult population. Despite this, it is disheartening to see the Western system, which are largely responsible for climate change and global warming, are unwilling to take responsibility for their actions, leaving poor countries suffer alone. Furthermore, Western regimes often benefit from that. Also, the situation in Egypt appears to be in a state of crisis, with a leader who came to power through the spilling of blood and a constitution that has been amended to enable him to remain in power. The nation is heavily indebted, with an external debt that has reached $162 billion, an economy that is controlled by the military, with its revenues not benefiting the citizens. This had led to great social divide, with tens of thousands of people imprisoned under harsh conditions without trial. In such a draconian atmosphere, it is understandable that people may feel that this is the end, leading to further social tension. However, as Nelson Mandela once said, "Don't judge me by my success, judge me by how many times I fell down and got back up again." It may take time, but change will come. Before 2011, it may have seemed unlikely that people would be interested in change, as history has shown that consciousness of people is higher than we may realize. Those who sought change but didn't have the chance to see it come to fruition didn't sacrifice in vain. The future holds hope, and the power and will of the people will bring about the change that is needed. Thank you.
You immediately kind of jump to the big picture, and it's clear that you see this question of inequality both as an Egyptian question, but also as a global question. But let's bring it back to your own personal journey. And there's a question from the audience from Catherine Winda, who says, as a lawyer and a human rights activist, what inspired you to use your legal expertise to defend human rights and advocate for political change in Egypt?
Okay, so actually it all started when I was young. It didn't have to do anything with law. I'm coming from a middle-class family, an upper middle-class family in Egypt, and actually the social gaps in Egypt is very big. And I've seen that I've been actually luckier than other Egyptians, and that I have something in hand that they don't. And this doesn't make me a hero. This makes me actually more of a servant for the people. At the time, I decided to join law school. At the very beginning, I thought that by going through the legal and judiciary paths in the Egyptian courts, that would help actually the people to gain the rights. But then I've seen actually full picture of the whole world, of the whole injustice that the people are having. And I think of law as a tool. It is a tool in the hand of the regime, the people who oppress us, but it is also a tool in our hand. And everyone choose to use this tool in a way or another. I choose to use it to draw a brighter future and to help those who are in need. And I think that this is actually the essence of justice, not law, because law is a little bit controversial, but justice in itself.
I like that framing, that having more than others makes you a servant of the people. And maybe we can come back to that. I want to turn to Sunita now, and in particular, your work in demonstrating that slavery is not inevitable and that it can be reversed. And I'd love to hear a little bit about how you went about doing that in India. And maybe we can weave into that a question from Aram Papazian, who says, what are some of the key strategies or approaches that you've implemented through Prajwala to combat human trafficking and support survivors?
I think for me, responding to slavery and the modern day form of slavery starts with acknowledging that there is a modern day form of slavery like human trafficking that exists in the world today, where even a 3-year-old child is not spared. There is a whole world of criminal elements who, for their commercial gains, have no qualms in buying and selling human beings and exploiting them for very, very nefarious purposes. I work on the issue of sex trafficking, where young babies as young as 2 and 3 years old are also sold into brothels so that some man can satisfy his libido. And all this is facilitated and enhanced by a whole world of criminal elements who capture on the vulnerability of human beings and use them, misuse them, exploit them. So it all starts with acknowledging that there is a modern day form of slavery like human trafficking that exists. Because one of the biggest problems that I face is absolute denial from the world. There are big problems everybody would like to accept because it's tangible, visible. This is far more underground. This is an organized crime. This is an organized crime which is a billion-dollar industry. It works clandestine and it is next to drugs and arms. It's so huge. And yet, globally, you see a form of silence, which is frightening. So my work starts with breaking that silence. But on the level of how do we strategize and show that this is not inevitable, like many people used to tell me that, this is a necessary evil, you can't, the world cannot be without this kind of this form of exploitation. And so for me, it is, my strategies are just 3-pronged. At one end, identifying those who are being exploited, removing them from the space of exploitation, helping them acknowledge and understand what they are going through, what is it that they need to come from, supporting them in recovering, healing from all the injuries, emotional, psychological, physical, spiritual, all the injuries that they have gone through, and providing them an ecosystem where they can choose other alternatives out of slavery and live a life with dignity. Today, we run one of the largest therapeutic communities, which is trauma-informed, where at any given point of time, there are not less than 400 to 600 victims, and the youngest one is around 3 years old. So, we're trying to create a small space where we can demonstrate to the world that this is not inevitable. You can change it, you can reverse it. The second strategy has been to understand that the slavery is not just about power dynamics. It's about a revenue model. It's about criminal elements who are using vulnerability to, kind of build their finances. So fixing them, charging them, taking them under the law and ensuring that they are exposed, ensuring that they are punished as per the law is a second strategy that we apply. And the third strategy is much more broader, where we confront and challenge the mindset of the society and the world that fosters such slavery. Mindsets that makes a man believe that I can go to Vietnam or Cambodia to buy a 3-year-old child. Mindsets of our brothers, our uncles, our husbands, our boyfriends, who believe that, buying and selling a human being for, sexual services is okay, it's normal, it's so. So confronting and challenging those mindsets and building a counter narrative is one of the 3 strategies that we use to challenge that slavery is not inevitable. You can change it. And in a small place, we are proving it every day, demonstrating it to the world that you need not accept this. You need to become a little more intolerant towards slavery, intolerant towards violence, intolerant towards exploitation, and kind of build a collective society that believes that a safe world is possible for all.
You saw me grimacing there because it's just so hard to hear the kind of ages that you're referring. I mean, exploitation of all kinds is
that's my daily reality, Heba.
Yes,
that's what I see every day in my life, and that is where I am battling every day, where I see the worst of humanity, and I struggle to ensure the best of humanity in me doesn't die.
I often say that in our work, including for us as journalists covering these kinds of issues, that you see the best and the worst of humanity. So maybe looking on the more positive side of things, there's a question from Elson Omutu, who says, could you name one success or positive outcome that you've witnessed in the lives of the survivors through your work at Prajwala?
Every day is a success. Every smile that we have restored on the faces of the persons that we have removed from exploitation is a success. But today, when I see also my children who were rescued at the age of 3 and 4, now, working and serving the society as doctors, engineers, chartered accountants, it is kind of a vindication of a different kind, where you see that it is possible to heal, it is possible to recover, and it is possible to believe in restorative justice. I see success every minute of my life, and that is why I'm sustaining for the last 30 years.
I see Father Michael nodding as well as you talk about healing. So that's good to see some common threads there. I'm going to turn to Marino now. Marino, you have also seen some successes in a very different sphere, and that is driving changes in the Colombian constitution to recognize Afro-Colombians as a minority, which then led to Afro-Colombians having more rights over land and resources and in politics. Tell us a bit about that journey.
Ali, thank you. It's a pleasure for me to be here, sharing and learning from my colleagues. Colombia is a very unique with a diversity population. I belong to the Afro-Colombian community. It's a very high population sitting in the coast of the Pacific. The Pacific coast in Colombia. And one of the challenges for us was the first one, slavery You know, our ancestors, they were brought from Africa to Colombia. And that was very difficult for them to get freedom. In my time, I've been a struggle from a, you know, community who have been suffering because the government, the state of Colombia, they had not paid attention to our community. We had poverty, we had conflict going on, we had everything over there. So we had two choices: or join those who do bad things for our community, or fight for justice, for liberty, and for peace. I believe in that, in this last one. This is what I've been doing. Because that in a difficult situation, I got a lot of assassination attempts against my life. I went to the US, then to this country. I spent 12 years over there to save my life. Part of my family stay, you know, stay still in Colombia while I was over there. Some others, they came with me to the United States. Well, you know, 12 years over there. But in my struggle, since I was a young person, I learned from my father, was a community organizer. I learned from him how to, you know, the difficult situation, how to do right thing for our people. When I was a youth, I joined to the Afro-Colombian movement, and we were able to go through the National Assembly for a new constitution. In 1991, we won the rights of the Afro-Colombian to the land, and also liberty, and also, you know, a national recognition of our population. So since then, I've been, you know, more visible in that struggle. And I believe that everything that I've been doing in Colombia to support others, especially my community, is because injustice and the suffering of our people need to be stopped anytime. And this is what I believe in this, you know, struggle for justice. I believe in change that is possible if people come together, people mobilize, people fight for. And I've been doing this. Now I'm serving against in my community. This is why I'm now in Chocó, helping our community over there, because you know, the situation of human rights is still difficult. There is still a fight between different groups, our groups, and they have been recruiting most of our youth people, and they have no opportunity. We believe in this new government. These abandoned sons of Colombia can get support, can get justice, and we are still fighting for justice in Colombia. It's not easy, but I still believe that this is what we can do to support others. You know,
Marina,
put our life.
Can I ask you, you mentioned earlier, you know, you had the choice between going the route of the criminal gangs or going the route of those who are fighting for peace. There's a question from Mariam Petrosian, who says, can you share a moment or a pivotal experience from your life that strengthened your determination to go the route of advocating for human rights and for the rights of the Afro-Colombian community? What was the kind of turning point for you where you made that choice?
Well, in some point of my life, I was in a difficult moment where I was hired because our group was looking for me to kill me. Somebody came to me and said, they send a message to you. You can join them, and they are waiting for you over there. When that person told me that, I said, I was thinking myself, and I said, what can I say to you about this? I have never taken a gun to kill other people. So I escaped from that, and I went through the rivers, mountains. So I left that place, and I came to the capital of Colombia, Bogota. It took me 2 months to get there. And I was thinking in that moment, I said, if I believe in peace and justice in human being, how can I take a gun to kill others? And that was a critical moment, because it was the person offered me that possibility to survive. I said, I prefer to risk my life and not take that decision. And since then, I've been, trying to share other people that I know the life is difficult. And this struggle is difficult, especially right here in Colombia. Being a human right is difficult because most of them have been killed. I got several assassination attempts against my life, but I still believe in peace. And that is why I fight for peace and justice.
You make this very clear distinction between the two paths that you can take. And it reminds me of something you said, Father Michael, which is that in the fight for social justice, we need to keep asking ourselves the question, what is it that we are against? And what is it that we are for? And that struck me because I think often those who are on the progressive left talk a lot about what they're against, but not so much what they're for. So I'd love for you to just explain that a little bit and answer that question for us. What is it that you are against and what is it that you are for? And how can that help kind of guide these efforts for fighting for human rights?
Well,
sorry, Marino, I'm gonna just turn to Father Michael on this one, and then we'll come back to you.
Okay, perfect.
Father Michael, you're on mute though. But we're 3 years. 3 years into COVID, and it's still happening.
Yeah, exactly. I just want to honor my fellow panelists for their own depth of sacrifice and commitment, which also gives me hope. During I remember actually when I was in the first years of the struggle, and I said, oh, I'm against apartheid, and a comrade said to me, yes, but what are you for? And I think it's often easy to say, we're against racism, we're against, gender discrimination, we're against human trafficking. So the question is what is our vision? And I think that question needs redefining in every generation. I mean, I think, for example, perhaps we are the first generation who's truly facing that Mother Earth is crying. First Nations always knew that and always sought to seek in harmony. But for the first time, and there's this heat wave across Europe and North America at the moment, and Mother Earth is telling us something, that we can live without, Mother Earth can live without us, but we can't live without Mother Earth. So this is one of the most urgent things of our time. But perhaps the oldest wound of the human family is actually the relationship between women and men. You know, we do workshops all over the world, in every continent. And there are two stories people tell most frequently. One is childhood trauma, and the other is gender-based violence. So I want to suggest to you, this is the oldest wound of the human family. And to address it, we have to support women, of course, fundamentally, but we also have to find a different way of bringing up the boy child. The boy child has to learn how to handle his emotions, learn to be vulnerable. One of the things we've been joking about while I've been here in Timor-Leste is they're saying in a society which has had a struggle for centuries, and Indonesian occupation, they said in the society, men don't cry. And so I said, I want a poster printed that says, real men cry. So we as men have to get in touch with our own vulnerability. And the end of gender-based violence is not about replacing one form of oppression for another. It's about the liberation of men as much as it is about the liberation of women. And I think in a sense, our leaders in South Africa understood that when they wrote the new constitution, because they could have simply said, we outlaw discrimination on the basis of racism, end of story. But we talked about gender, we talked about disability, we talked about sexual orientation as well, because what that speaks to is that we are one human family. But the particular frontiers, like I honor my sister for this work against human trafficking and the importance of it. But in what my brother sang for Colombia, he also for me, he exudes the sense of, but fundamentally I'm human. I'm not first of all a man, I'm not first of all black, I'm firstly a human being. And I think Nelson Mandela taught us that we can live together in peace. So always, 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 negotiations are better than the gun. Now, we had an armed struggle, but as soon as the regime said, we will talk, we sat at the table. The armed struggle came to an end. So we were forced into something very terrible for which we paid a cost. And as a nation, as South Africa, we are committed everywhere in the world to negotiated settlements, to peaceful solutions to conflict. But yes, and I suppose as a person of faith,
so tell us, what are you for? What is that vision?
Well, as
then,
a
if you were to
person
try
of
to
faith,
summarize
I would say that we need to participate in God's dream for the human family. And God's dream is a nation, is a world in which we all flourish, where the end of inequality, but also we live in harmony with Mother Earth. In a practical way in South Africa, that's about dealing with poverty, unemployment, corruption, endemic corruption. So indeed, we need in the world today ethical, competent, compassionate leaders at every level of society. And I think the people that I'm watching on the screen, I see you all as ethical, competent, and compassionate leaders. And we need them at every direction of the world, at every level.
So let's turn to those ethical, competent, and compassionate leaders in kind of understanding the craft of fighting for human rights, if I can put it that way. And I want to come back to you, Sunita, because you experienced so much that would make a person angry. In fact, all of you have, not only the gang rape that you were subjected to as a young girl, but the personal assaults that you've since then come under 17 times, I think. And you say that your experience triggered an anger that drove you then and still drives you today. And I'm just curious in all of this talk of, not letting our experiences create a sense of revenge and healing from trauma. Do you think anger needs to be a key driver in the struggle for human rights?
I definitely think so, because anger has driven me for the last 30 years. It triggered it, it nurtures it, it pushes it, it drives it, it sustains it. The point is, how do you channelize the anger in you? At the age of 15, when I was gang raped by 8 men, it left me with a deep, deep outrage and anger of not the rape per se, but how the world viewed me. The entire society, entire community looked at me as somebody who has done the mistake, somebody who has committed the crime, you know, for a crime that I had not committed. That was the trigger of the first anger that made me what I am today. And the choice I made is, how do I channelize this anger into a constructive energy that looks at solutions to what happened to me? And that energy is something that made me become very intolerant. See, some of the words we use, we create a narrative of negativity, and that we need to change. I became intolerant to violence. And that is what this anger pushed me to. It created a constructive energy to look at the world from a different space. What happened to me cannot happen to anybody else. And I will fight for it with every breath of my life. So I channelize my anger as a constructive energy. And that is the choice one has to make. If you allow the anger to consume you, to infiltrate and seep into you all the negativity, the toxicity that actually created this kind of violence, you are also perpetuating the same crime. So how do we change that? We change that by, channelizing your anger. And what happened to me 35 years back is happening 100 times more today in 2023. At one point, I never heard about a 6-month baby being raped. I never heard about the rape being used as a weapon of war in some part of the world. But today, all of that is happening. So the anger is growing, and so is my passion and my motivation to end this all and to fight, continuing the fight. Now, somebody asked me, how do you sustain for so many years? This is what sustains me. My anger sustains me because I channelize my anger in a way that it's positive for the world.
I see both Mahinur and Father Michael nodding. So I guess that means there's a lot of anger, but also support for channeling it in the way that you talk about, Sunita. Mahinur, I think you've said similar things about the need to ensure that activists remain empathetic and don't seek revenge, and that kind of goes back to what Father Michael was saying at the beginning. But on this question of remaining optimistic or continuing the fight, so for Sunita, that anger drives her. For you, how do you remain optimistic? And especially when we look, Sunita, you were just saying now in many ways things are even worse than 35 years ago when you started this fight. And if we take Egypt as an example, Mahinur, when we look at what it has become after the revolution and the ushering in of a new government that you consider to be a terrorist regime, what was that activism worth it? And how do you keep going in situations where you're not necessarily seeing progress?
Yes, totally worth it. I'd like to see actually progress not as a linear process, but it's more of steps forward and then backward. And the thing is that I all the time, because before the revolution, actually, I had a dream that I thought that I will never see, but I've kept with others. I've never worked alone, so I'm not. I believe all the time in the idea of group working and that there is no kind of individual sacrifice or salvation that will help. So before the revolution, I thought that the Egyptian people deserve a better future, but I thought that I will never see it. I thought that I will die before Mubarak leave the regime. And actually 2 days before the revolution, there was a protest for some poor people who had been placed in Alexandria, my own hometown. And people were not actually, the ordinary people in the streets were not with those people. They were not in support or in solidarity with them. But on the 25th of January, out of nowhere, I saw Egyptian people coming from every street, believing in a better future. And then this actually made me believe more in what I believe in, is that there is no sacrifice, there is no work that ever goes in vain. And that if it is for the oppressors, if it is for the evil people or whatsoever, who are working day and night to stand together and keep their position, then it is our duty as well as people to keep on working. By everything that we would do, the coming generations, the coming people actually will try to build over that, will learn from us. I've learned from people before me, and they have learned from people before them. So I think that's one thing. For me, it's not anger against people that drives me. It's actually anger against myself, that I was privileged, that I didn't do anything to be more privileged than others who actually probably would be better than me if they had the same chances and opportunities. So that's the thing. It's actually all the time when I wake up, I say that I'm in a place of privilege, and actually this is a kind of a selfish thing as well. If you want to live in peace, if you want to keep your privileges, then you have to seek privilege for everyone, because at a time when the underprivileged people will find nothing, they will attack you as well. And that's the right. That's actually the only way they will fight for their lives and freedom. So the only way for us all to survive and to build a better future for us all is to stand all together and fight against inhumanity in general. And when we win, and that's the most important thing, we have to keep in mind that we fought not to be superior, but just for all of us to be equal, and that maybe will save us and save our revolution and everything. And so I will never, ever regret the idea of being one of millions of Egyptians who stroll the streets to just calling for better future and freedom.
Wow.
Father Michael, I see you nodding furiously and taking notes. Did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, it's interesting. Maybe going back a step, I understand my sister's anger, and she's got a million reasons more than most people why you should be angry. But she also made the point that anger can consume us. But I hear in how she describes her work a vision for a different kind of world. You know, a vision in which children, women, vulnerable people are protected. And how she says she has success every day. And I think, coming to what my sister just said about, I think there's healthy and unhealthy guilt. When I was a young white student, the way we dealt with our guilt was to drink bad red wine. Now, all that did was give us hangovers. And some of us realize, the system means I'm part of the oppressive group. So with privilege comes responsibility. And then I love what she says about, well, if I want to enjoy privilege has to be for everybody. So again, driven towards division. I think we would still have apartheid in South Africa if we had not been very angry as a nation. But in a sense, we had to, in the end, transform the anger into the vision of what we want to create. So in a sense, for me, the driving force is our love for people, our love for humanity. But also, I also love what my sister says about, we travel on the shoulders of giants. And I always marvel that in South Africa, there were people struggle for hundreds of years, and they only ever in their lifetime saw things get worse. But they dared to struggle, particularly women who suffered the most, but they still had a belief in their God-given right to a place in their son, to a place of dignity, and a belief, just the way African-American people sang those songs, the spirituals, knowing that and the songs gave them the energy, the vision that one day there will be change. And I think in the beauty of today's world, like we can be here from these different countries, we can give each other inspiration. And the thing that when I listen to each of you, the thing that comes back to my mind is self-care. those who are human rights defenders, those who are activists for justice, we need to find ways of caring for each other. Otherwise, we'll all simply burn out, and that doesn't help. So self-care, I think, is incredibly important. We've got to give ourselves permission to love ourselves as well. Right?
Well, on that note, just one last question for Marino before we wrap up. Marino, how do you balance, the aspirations that you have to fight for human rights with the real risks that you face every day? And in your case, your son paid his life for it. How do you take care of yourself while you fight this fight?
Hi, Ali. Let me say a few words in Spanish because we have a lot of watching Spanish speaker, and they are, expecting that I say something, greeting them. Mando un saludo especial a todos los que nos están viendo en español ahora, especialmente en el Chocó. Este es un evento muy importante y estamos hablando sobre los derechos humanos basado en la lucha de Nelson Mandela a través de una organización muy importante a nivel internacional. So what I said was I send a greeting to everybody who is watching us, and they are Spanish speaker. They can listen what we said, but they are following us. Colombia, like I said before, Colombia is a country crossed by multiple social, political, and economic problems, with a diverse population that makes very rich in its culture. Unfortunately, the wars that we have lived through decades has made us as one of the most dangerous countries in the world. It's not easy to do this work. It's not easy speaking about human rights. It's not easy trying to bring justice to an injustice situation. But I believe in that working for peace and justice remain a combined, that we must change this reality of the work for reconciliation, justice, and democracy, where each of these problems and the differences can be resolved without being more death or killing. It's if we take the experience of some, like Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King, and some others unknown person fighting in their own country, own community for justice, that make me more strong in what I believe, in what I do every day. Because I say it's not only me fighting for justice, because injustice, it is everywhere. Everywhere we see a struggle for survival. Diverse population and community are socially impacted by change as a consequence of evolutionary process that affect the fundamental rights of the others. Sometimes those change promoted by the seek of power or wealth come from sector with important force in politics, economic, or even for natural resources, especially in our community. This is the most common issues because, entities, in particular, people to search for natural resources, and they wanted to take out the population who have been living there. They don't care about human rights. They just care about wealth. that's injustice. And this is the thing that we fight every day. We said, if you need me, you need the natural resources, you need to do something over there. You have first thought and make a dialogue, a consultation with the community over there. But you can't take them out just because you want rich, you want to be rich. You want to take out everything that we have.
You're
So
putting
that's
your
injustice.
finger on
I can't live with that.
on one of the bigger social issues of our time, which is the wealth inequality and the fight for equitable distribution of resources. I'm afraid we're out of time, so I'm just going to put one last question to Father Michael, if you can give us a brief answer, but I think it's important to ask this question before we end. In the face of all of these major societal issues, so Marina was just talking about, this major wealth inequality, but we've talked about poor governance, we've talked about gender-based violence, we've talked about all kinds of issues. What advice would you have for regular people who may not necessarily feel like they are human rights activists or in a position to, or facing the kinds of major sacrifices that you have? How can they make a difference in their communities and contribute to a more just and equitable world?
No, thank you very much. I think we can let ourselves off the hook and saying, I'm not the president, I'm not the prime minister, and therefore there's nothing for me to do. So I think if our hearts and eyes are open, we will see injustice where we are. So I think in the end, it's about treating other human beings as we want to be treated ourselves. But on the bigger picture, we need to call for nuclear disarmament, the ending of the arms trade. I pray every day that the arms manufacturers will go bankrupt. We need to call for reparations for slavery and colonization. We need to work for climate justice, against fossil fuels and support of renewable energy. We need to work with men and boys to deal with the root causes of gender-based violence, especially patriarchy. But also, I want to give a loving embrace to my fellow young Nelson Mandelas who are viewing us today, to say never, 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 never give up. And the next generation will say, thank you for playing your part.
Well, I have heard regularly through this conversation that with privilege comes responsibility, that fighting for human rights is a choice that we can all make, and that the anger that some of us may feel and what we at the New Humanitarian call a calm moral outrage can be channeled in a way that is restorative, and that we can gain a lot by being inspired by others. Thank you, Mahinur, Sunita, Marino, Father Michael, for sharing your experiences and journeys with us, and hopefully they can help others who are on a similar path. We have another event coming up in the Aurora Dialogue series, again in partnership with the New Humanitarian, on 19th of August, which is World Humanitarian Day. So join us then for a look at the massive and growing gap between humanitarian needs around the world and the ability to respond to them and how we tackle that challenge. And until then, you can get more information about the speakers you heard from today on the Aurora Humanitarian Initiative's website, auroraprize.com, and information about ongoing humanitarian crises around the world on the New Humanitarian's website, thenewhumanitarian.org. Thank you very much, and happy Nelson Mandela Day to everyone.
Thank you for being a wonderful moderator.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.